All right, thank you so much. Thanks, Tarini. Okay, good morning, everyone. To everyone who has joined in today, very warm welcome to the 13th Urban 20 Manthan, a series that brings global and national experts to deliberate on critical challenges faced by our cities. Today's session is a special one, so because we are focusing on unpacking U20 priorities from a specific gender lens. The next hour we're going to dedicate to our speakers, some of the brightest and the best minds in the business, forerunners in the domain of inclusion and gender, who will be speaking volumes about the work that they have been doing and some perspective on how to make our cities better for everyone. The discussions will specifically aim to demystify some gender-inclusive urban planning practices and policies, investigate issues leading to women's underrepresentation, and also explore certain pathways to promote women-led development for shaping a better future for all and for women and for all the genders in the context. But before we jump into it, a few housekeeping points for everyone. Depending on your internet connection, the platform may have a delay of around 10 seconds or more, so please do bear with us. To all the panelists, if possible, I would urge all of you to keep your videos on through the session. It goes without saying, please do respect the speakers. Also, if you are not speaking, I would urge you to keep your mics on mute. To all those who have tuned in, please do keep us busy in the Q&A box and feel free to post your comments and questions. We will attempt to come back to them at the end of the session. So our technical team from the back end will be helping us collate those questions for us. Now that the housekeeping points are out of the way, let's dive right into it. Firstly, to begin with, I'm Utsav Choudhury. I'm a program manager at the Inclusive Cities Center at the National Institute of Urban Affairs. And once again, a very warm welcome to our viewers, our participants, and most of all, our panelists. Thank you so much for being here today. Today, we are joined by 5 esteemed guests. As I say, best of the business, best of the minds, to help us unbundle some complicated questions around urban and gender. To start with, I will introduce each of you. I'll start with Ms. Paulomi Pal. She is currently the program specialist for ending violence against women at UN Women in India. Paulomi is an Indian development practitioner and researcher focusing on women's rights, gender-based violence, and women's economic empowerment. She brings extensive experience in project management, qualitative research, advocacy, and policy work at regional, national, and state levels in India. Paulomi, thank you so much for being here, and we look forward to hearing from you. Next up, we are also joined by Ms. Shruti Narayan. She is C40's Regional Director for South and West Asia. With global experience spanning over 2 decades, she leads C40's regional efforts to mainstream climate action for resilient and equitable cities. Before joining C40, Shruti has worked in several key global organizations such as ARUP and USAID. She is particularly passionate about working with students and women-led groups in building a strong and supportive community of climate champions. Makes perfect sense to have Shruti on board today. Thank you so much for being here, Shruti. The next guest today is Ms. Girija Godbole. She is the water fund lead at the Nature Conservancy. Girija is a trained anthropologist and has worked in the environment and development sector for more than 2 decades. She is also a Gates Cambridge scholar and a lead fellow. Prior to joining the Nature Conservancy, she has conducted qualitative research across a number of topics and has worked with Center for Policy Studies at IIT Bombay. Girija, thank you so much for being here. And for those listeners who are joining us, Girija is joining us from across the sea. She is currently in London. And Girija, thank you for accommodating the time difference. Really appreciate it. We are also joined by Ms. Mitali Nikore. She is a transport specialist at the World Bank. Mitali has been a long-standing ally with NIUA for a number of gender-related topics. So thank you again for being here, Mitali. For everyone's knowledge, Mitali is an economist and focuses on devising solutions on inclusive, sustainable urban mobility, regional connectivity, and multimodal transport in South Asia. Mitali is also the lead writer of World Bank's Toolkit of Enabling Gender-Responsive Urban Mobility and Public Spaces. In case if you haven't read that, please do. It's an excellent knowledge piece. I mean, it'll help with a lot of perspective on gender-focused mobility. Last but not the least, we have with us Mr. Anshul Tewari, the founder of Youth Ki Awaaz. Anshul is an Ashoka Fellow for Social Entrepreneurship and was named a Young Innovator by the United Nations ITU. He has previously also served on the UN Women Civil Society Advisory Board for South and Southeast Asia. Also makes perfect sense to have Anshul on board with all the work that he's doing in inclusion. Welcome, Anshul. So without taking too much time, I'm going to quickly invite Polemy Paul to set the context, please. Polemy, the stage is over to you.
Thank you, Utsav, and good morning, everybody. And many thanks for giving UN Women the opportunity to set the context here. I just wanted to start by saying that UN Women has been very closely associated with G20. And during Urban 20 Mayor Summit, UN Women in partnership with NIUA launched the report Mainstreaming Women-Led Urban Frameworks. And this report was actually an outcome of a two-day dialogue with more than 60 thought leaders who worked across diverse themes of gender and urban ecosystems who were part of this. It looked at 6 pillars of U20, encouraging environmentally responsible behaviors, ensuring water security, accelerating climate finance, championing local identities, reinventing frameworks for urban governance and planning, and catalyzing digital urban futures. Now, the final U20 communique and also the final New Delhi's Leaders' Declaration reiterated on inclusive, resilient, and sustainable cities for the future, along with enhanced financial mobilization and resource utilization. But one thing to be noted was how there was intentional prioritization of gender equality across each group, and that is where I want to really set the context for today. And with you from two implemented the Safe Cities program, which was then taken to Maharashtra, 6 cities in Bhopal, in Jaipur, and Bangalore. And later on, we actually used the framework in the rural context, in the tea gardens in Assam. And currently, we are taking the same framework of safe cities into commodity sectors like tourism and spices, and also garment, which is across several states in India. One of the things I really wanted to mention here and highlight is that in MPTB, for instance, Madhya Pradesh, for instance, we are working very closely with the MP Tourism Board and looking at safe tourism for solo women travelers, but also looking at safety for women who are working within the tourism industry. And most of you already know, work is really a normative work from have been using for our work, like CEDAW, Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, ICCPR, and also Sustainable Development Agenda 2030. Reiterate one of the things which UN Habitat is a big member of, working along with UN Women on safe cities. And they say that the number of women that appear in public realm during the day and especially at night is an indicator of the health of a society, as well as safety and livability in a city. So that is something you already know, that it really takes a lot of elements which we need to think of, like what is the role of gender-based violence, how is it safe outside, what is the housing situation, inadequate sanitation, lighting, transport. These are big pillars in our safe cities work. One of the things which I wanted to say and again reiterate is the Safe Cities program, which UN Women has been championing and implementing in several states, one of the ideas is that it is really not the mandate of one ministry. For instance, Ministry of Women and Child Development, we feel that it is really a convergent effort of the Home Department, of Social Justice, Transportation, Tourism, Education, Local Self-Government, Culture and Youth Affairs, Health and Family Welfare, Labor, and of course, Planning and Finance. I might have left out some, but basically that's one of the ideas. In a nutshell, therefore, the stakeholders for our work include infrastructure and design, public transport, policing, and education. Some of the stakeholders for our work, extensive work in this area of safe cities and safe public spaces, has been with government departments, agencies, grassroots women's organizations, CSOs, CBOs, groups working with men and boys, frontline workers, ASHA workers, Anganwadi workers at the grassroots level, media, private sector, and of course, research institutions. Currently, I'm very happy to share that UN Women is working on smart cities as safe cities with a tourism lens in Goa, and we intend to work in Goa for the next 3 years. We also have a big component of strengthening response mechanisms, and we are working on one-stop centers and how do we really facilitate these referral systems for survivors of violence and women who are at risk of violence. I would like to end with 6 pillars of our Safe Cities work, which I'm sure is going to echo with a lot of discussions and conversations you have today. So principle 1 is signposting. Principle 2 is visibility. Principle 3 is the presence of people, which I really feel like, and that's something which we have really learned in Madhya Pradesh, that the more number of women vendors, women on the street, women guides, the safer women and other genders feel, Principle 4 is formal surveillance and access to help. Principle 5 is spatial design and maintenance, and that is also for, we are looking at clean and friendly environments. That's where this principle is being derived. And principle 6 is to act together, community participation. So with this in mind, I am sure I've taken a lot of time, but yes, over to you, Utsav, and really happy to be in the room. Thank you.
Thank you, Paulumi. Thank you for beautifully setting the context and also invoking some of these concepts of safety, convergence, and strengthening the ecosystems and allowing women to access the city in the night and across like tourism. And those are like really important concepts that we'll be also exploring in the next few sections. But like without taking too much time, the first panelist that I'm going to invite and the question that I have for her. So the first panelist will be Shruti. So Shruti, the question that I have for you is, in the context of urban finance, how can cities strike a balance between achieving greater autonomy and collaborating effectively with state authorities to address climate challenges and promote sustainable development? Shruti, over to you.
Thank you, Utsav. I wish we could resolve that and I had an answer, but I don't. I'll just, because then we wouldn't be having this conversation on climate action. But, just so not to take too much time, I just want to say that, the question of climate finance is very, very critical because, we are increasingly understanding that there is a significant gap for climate finance, and especially in global south, right? And also, if you focus on that, there is a specific need for adaptation and resilience financing, right? And how that comes in. There have been discussions around loss and damage fund, and that was started at the last COP, and we're hoping that it gets some structure to seeing, because we're probably seeing 10%. 5 to 10% of what's needed is currently kind of flowing into adaptation finance. But let me kind of bring this to from a gender focus, right? So I think why finance is important is obviously the need for any climate action needs a very concerted, systemic effort that requires every single player to be on the table, right? So when you look at it from a governance perspective, it requires, especially in India, the city, the state and the national government, because that's the way our urban governance is structured, right? We don't have cities that have all the autonomy. So we obviously need to work with the state governments, and they have to have a sort of a role on the table to make these decisions, right? It's also important when we look at the stakeholders that we include everyone on the table. And, it's an established fact, like we can't doubt that climate change is happening. I'm hoping no one is doubting that, at least on this, this webinar. We do still meet people who doubt it, but, and it's also established that women and vulnerable will be the most impacted, right? We already know, without any numbers stated, like, more than 70 or 60%, 67, depending on the report, of the workers that are outdoors are women, right? They produce food. The economy is heavily reliant on them. So if we do not include women in the discussion of our solutions on climate, and therefore our solutions on climate finance, we will not resolve and solve this problem in a systemic way that is mainstream. What is very critical is that we're not developing academic reports and really moving on action on the ground. We don't have time, right? We're already, science has established that we've already broken the records of what was predicted, and we're actually accelerating towards even, going and reaching the climate conditions even further. Now, just a couple of things I know, because I don't know, you'll probably tell me when I need to stop, because this discussion can go on forever. But we've seen some very, very fantastic examples, right? And I just want to highlight a couple to say, we saw microfinance in India, right? Microfinance in India was very women-centered and actually was able to resolve a lot of issues. And that is a way, so women played a very critical role in financial institutions, NBFCs, lending to women for different, aspects, right? And that shifted the entire microfinance industry in India. We have some fantastic examples from Gujarat of Seva, the Mahila Housing Trust. There are some really, really incredible examples of how women have led the way. The second example that I want to highlight is how, the ASHA workers. I think when you look at the maternal and, prenatal care, ASHA workers, that was a system developed by India on really reaching the community were women. And they really shifted the needle. And, I think if we are able to utilize the same working group, the same group of people, or same models of like microfinance, we will be able to shift the window. So it's about local, contextual, and focused interventions on finance at that level. We have recently seen one of the first parametric climate insurance come out in Ahmedabad, which focused on women workers outdoors. I don't know how many people are aware of that, but as we're building up the heat in cities, or climate action is getting accelerated, there are two aspects that are important, right? Looking at mitigation aspects and looking at adaptation aspects. And climate insurance is a great way. Again, this insurance product empowered women who are working outdoors to bring them out. The last point I want to say is that there are different, women have to be on the table for discussion, right? We cannot have discussions without women. We know that they're not included. What are we doing to include them? C40s, all climate action plans, all discussions. We have a very, very active Inclusive Climate Action Academy, where we work with cities to ensure that women are a part of informing the development of a climate action plan. Secondly, what are the ways that any strategies, actions, and projects that are coming out of the climate action plan include women? I want to highlight an example quickly. We talk about a lot of incentives that are given to women for buses. Fantastic effort. I'm not doubting that. But what happens when they get off the bus stop and then they have to walk about 10 kilometers on a dark street to reach their houses? We cannot work in isolation. This has to be an integrated approach. We have to look at systemic change, where we are looking at incentives and how they are integrated within the larger functioning of the city, its economic planning, its urban planning, and its capital planning. And that has to have a lens of social and just transition. So I will just stop here because I want to give a chance for other panelists, but happy to come back for any follow-ups. Thank you.
That was wonderful, Shruti. I think you have answered like pretty much all of what I had in my mind. And you have also talked about the concept of incentives. I think that is a beautiful way to also sort of segue onto the next piece of the question that I have. Girija, if I may, the question that I have for you is that Shruti talked about incentives and systems, and she also talked about the need for local and contextual. Could you help us maybe identify some examples of best practices from your experience that illustrate how gender considerations have been integrated into water security initiatives? And do those also have an aspect of incentives or a long-term systemic benefit, which then encourages women's participation and benefits them in the long term?
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. And I could also participate in the Delhi event, the U20. So it's nice to be back here. Yeah, I mean, Shruti set the stage very well before me, so it makes it easy for me. As she said, it's a matter of systemic change. So we see that women are given the responsibility of collecting water in most of the places. But when it comes to designing the water systems, planning for it, or taking the policy decisions, you often see that they are not there on the table. And that's one important thing that needs to change. Of course, it's slowly changing now. So for example, in the Jal Jeevan Mission program of the government of India, you have like almost 50% reservation is for women on the committees, various committees in the leadership roles. So it's definitely changing. And hopefully they don't just remain on the paper. There are also examples in, say, urban habitations, like slum-like areas, where women are now encouraged to become the water aunties. So they are encouraged to run the small water enterprises. So for example, there's this project by USAID, and I think it's called Sustainable Enterprises for Water and Health, SEWA. So they are doing this project in around 11 states in India, I suppose, in which they have these water aunties who run the small safe drinking water enterprises. And I think this slowly leads the capacity building of women. So maybe this is not maybe we often don't think of this aspect so much. It's just, for many people, it's just like, okay, they're providing drinking water. Okay. But it has many other impacts on women's empowerment component as well. And that's, I think it's very important. So yeah, so these are some of the examples. But I think in STEM also women should be encouraged to participate more. So once they have that technical knowledge, they will be part of the actual planning, designing of the water systems. And that will have, of course, impact on the overall more efficient water systems, perhaps, because women bring in certain perspectives. And here, when I say women, I am very mindful that women is not a monolithic entity. They are divided, given their age, their marital status, especially in case of women, then their class, caste, religion. Also, I think when we especially talk about the wash component, we often see that women don't participate in many of the economic activities because of lack of sanitation facilities as well. And even in like bigger cities like Pune, I come from Pune. So even in cities like Pune, in the marketplaces, you hardly have proper toilets for women. And I mean, this is the case for even the police, the women police of ground staff or the government officials, that they often have to kind of make some other arrangements when they are on duty. Like, for example, we recently had this Ganesh festival in Pune, but not at all places the women police staff can go and use the toilets because they just are not there. And when we talk about transgender as well, there is hardly any presence of toilets for transgender, the third gender. So they also need to be involved in the whole planning of the wash programs in cities. Of course, there are few examples, say for example, in Chennai, where there are toilets for the third gender, and they are involved in the planning of it. But it's very like, these examples are very rare and they need to be mainstream. So yeah. So for now, I think I'll stop here.
Thank you, Girija. I think I love the fact that you brought out this aspect of intersectionality and how that terminology of gender is not a monolith, because every individual is different and they have different needs. And also the fact that the system of sanitation at large in the cities is so unaccommodating of the needs of women, especially in public spaces. I think that is a big consideration that we need to look at, and how that is an impediment to participation at large is something worth deliberating about. But we'll come to it. Girija, thank you for picking those questions up. Next up, I have Mitali. Mitali, the question that I have for you is like, why is it? I mean, some of that has already been answered by Shruti and Girija in some sense. But when we shift the perspective to mobility, why is it important for cities to plan and build gender-responsive urban mobility and public spaces for the overall economic well-being and safety of urban ecosystems? Again, this seems like a no-brainer question, but if you could sort of deep dive into the process and why that should be more systemic in nature, that'd be wonderful. Mitali, over to you.
Thanks, Utsav. So, I want to just start off with a little bit of a disclaimer that, of course, I am representing the World Bank, but some of the views that I'm expressing are my own. So, just for sanity checks. So, with that out of the way, let's do a thought experiment. We've talked quite a lot from the macro sense, but let's do a thought experiment. Let's say that a city, is grappling with this policy challenge. Okay, we have to do something to bring more women onto public transport, or make public transport easier for women, right? Now, a city authority doesn't really know what easier means. So for them, easier means more women should use urban public transport, right? That's the ultimate outcome that they are going for. Now, when they talk to some groups and policy advisors, etc., they will come to this, conclusion that, look, we have 2 or 3 levers to work with, right? We have cost, that yes, it's very expensive, and low-income women are finding it very hard because they are the ones who are really using public transport. It's not the rich women who are using public transport. Second, they'll say, okay, fine, the service quality is bad, it's difficult, like Shruti pointed out. You take the metro, you get off the metro, you don't have anything. That's, your integrated approach. And quality of service overall unpredictable, all of that, these issues are there. And the third issue is safety, that basically women are getting harassed at every step. घर से निकले, harassment हो रहा है, आप vehicle में जाओगे, वहां पे someone is staring at you and randomly taking your photograph on a metro or a bus. You are getting touched inappropriately, you are getting catcalled, so all of it is happening, right? So these are your 3 major levers that you can work with. You can either make it more affordable, or you can make the service better, or you can make the system safer, right? If you are a city. Now, the second and third are much harder, right? Making a system safer means that you have to work with men. And the men who are running these, organizations, they are like, ye to hona nahi hai. You can't change men, men will be men. So we can't do anything on safety, right? So let's do away with that lever altogether. Then, now we want to improve our services. That means that the Metro Corporation has to talk to the Bus Transport Corporation. And the 2 of them then have to talk to the municipal agency, which means everybody has to sit in one room. That impossibility will only happen if a conference such as this is convened by either me, that is bank, or you, Utsav, that is NIUA, or by Polomi, or by Shruti. Like one of us will have to send an invitation, get everyone in a room and spark that conversation. So overall, the coordination and conversation between the agencies definitely is a challenge, and that is therefore, again, harder to solve. So what is easy and in my control, right? As a state government, I can say I will allocate a certain amount of money to my, corporations, and I will make transport free for women, right? Because for me, that is something which I can control. That's a policy I can control. And that's what we are seeing that's happening in state after state, whether it's Punjab, whether it's Tamil Nadu, whether it's Delhi, and a lot of other states are, now looking at that policy very seriously, because, there's also a competition among states, right? That Punjab made it free, so let me also make it free. That sort of a discussion is going on. But what is the flip side of it? Again, I'm not saying it's good or bad. I know why it's happening. I just explained to you the political economy of it, right? But the flip side of this, when we talk to women who are using these free services, whether in Delhi or in Tamil Nadu, in both of which, the World Bank has projects, women are telling us that the frequency of services is starting to reduce because the services are free. Second, they are telling us that literally bus conductors are heckling them when they, get onto the bus, that you are a free traveler. What right do you have to be on the bus? You're not even paying for it, right? And the harassment which then is happening from the other, commuters, especially male commuters, the bus conductor is not coming to help, which earlier used to be the case actually with some of the, people we spoke in Chennai. So, all in all, this policy over which a state government feels it has control is leading to an inadvertent impact that it's making the system less safe and the service worse than it already is. And I mean, of course, we are documenting all of this in our reports, and we will be coming out with some reports on Delhi, in the coming months, and hope to discuss with all of you as we launch those. But the basic point, of this entire thought experiment that I just did with all of you is that even one simple policy reform, of trying to make transport free, which is the easiest one to implement, may not be the best one to implement, is also fraught with so many difficulties. Now, in our toolkit, we have recommended about a menu of reforms actually, which are around 4 pillars. The first being assessing the ground situation and really advocating for more safety audits, gender disaggregated data collection on mobility patterns, because that is really where a city level authority can pretty much understand that, look, these are the problem points, and that mapping exercise is something we are helping Chennai to do, where, a map of Chennai, a digital twin of Chennai is already being created for a lot of public services. And there we are advocating that women's safety and, instances of sexual harassment should also get included in that map. And that's pretty much accepted by the city authorities. And that's something that already, if you look at some of the NGOs like the Red Dot Foundation and Safety Pin, they are already doing some of that mapping in some cities. But this will be probably the first time that a city authority themselves, creates this digital twin and then very comprehensively maps instances of sexual harassment, around a city map. So I think this is something that helps them to visualize and direct services in a data-driven fashion. Now, the second pillar that we really advocate for is around strengthening policies and institutions. And, we are even urging some of these city level authorities, public transport authorities, to look at diversity and inclusion very seriously, because again, we can't say hire more women. The reality is, when we go to any of these authorities and talk to them, they say, look, we are not hiring at all. We have a hiring freeze. We are hiring consultants. We can't control which consultant comes in and what the composition of their team is. But what we can advocate is that over time, they can develop diversity and inclusion plans so that over the years, their workforce becomes more and more diverse. And that's something that they're open to. And we're working with them on that. Of course, setting up the gender lab in Chennai has been a really big win. And we are now working with the National Capital Region Transport Corporation to also convince them about the merits of a gender lab and really situating a gender lab in NCRTC, in Delhi Metro. These could send out the right signals for other planning corporations and SPVs that are being set up for specialized projects. Say, for example, your high-speed railway is coming out. That can have a gender lab, which is modeled around the NCRTC gender lab. So that, these kind of solutions, it's like you see one and then it kind of snowballs in other parts of the country. And that's really what we're trying to, push for. And then I think the other aspect is really around building capacity. I mean, that's a major, major challenge because we have seen it, the gender lab in Chennai is 3 people, and they have to review each and every proposal that comes from the Greater Chennai Corporation, that comes from the Metro Rail Corporation, that comes from the Bus Transport Corporation, and give their inputs from a gender lens. I mean, it might seem like, oh, it's just gender inputs, kitna hi hoga, 2 page, 3 page, but it's like you have to read the entire thing, na? You have to read the entire DPR, you have to read the entire project planning. So it's a very involved exercise actually, and then that's so one thing we're working on is capacity building with a lot of cities, and the last aspect is really around improving services. And there again, when we look at Chennai and Delhi, both of which we're very heavily involved in, is where we are looking at station planning, multimodal integration, and trying to introduce things like request bus stop services. I'm telling you, I've been advocating for this request bus stop for 3 years now with Chennai. And I'm telling them, look, it's already working in Hyderabad, it's working in Toronto, it's working in, so Vienna. It's like, just look at it. And they're like, yes, we'll do it, we'll do it. But it's, so there's a positive reception because it's a low cost, less capital solution. But even to implement a low cost solution requires so much operational planning that, somebody will say, yeah, I want to stop the bus here. Now, is that area designated? No, it's not designated. So how do you control? How many times will you allow that stop, that extra stopping? What will be the impact on the bus cost? We have actually built a model in the bank on the cost of operating diesel versus electric versus CNG buses. And we are actually doing a quantitative analysis of the request bus stop program using that model, and to try and convince authorities. But it's like it takes that much effort to just work out the nuts and bolts of implementing a lot of these solutions. So I think at the end of the day, what is very clear is that cities are very well intentioned. They know that the why is very clear to a lot of cities, that yes, the overall overarching aim of facilitating women's participation in the workforce, in education, in skill training, and even in leisure, and even for mobility of care, it's very clear to them that women need to be part of the narrative and of public spaces when you talk to the authorities. But the how of it is where there is a struggle, and the how of it is also where there is a there's a little bit of a lethargy, I would say, and you need to sit with them and provide that support. And I would say the Bangalore Gender Lab is also a great example of and just running with it, because GIZ is supporting the Bangalore Gender Lab, and they're doing a phenomenal job. And I mean, we are like resource persons and experts in that project, and they are like, you just tell us, you just train us, and we'll implement it ourselves, which is the dream, like that's the dream. So we are seeing that also in cities like Bangalore, but there's a long way to go in terms of particularly the ideas and the capacity. So with the toolkit, our aim was to really put a lot of ideas out there. It has nearly 50 case studies from across the world. And we have, these solution areas. Cities can pick up and choose what works for them. We can advise cities also on what works for them. We can work with them long term. But it just takes a little bit of a concerted effort. Ki, haan, chalo. We are, let's keep pushing this. And we have to recognize the unintended consequences.
Thank you, Mitali.
So
That was really comprehensive. I think a few things that I picked up from what you said. First of all, the good parts, which is that there is the right intent. Cities want to do it, and I also speak out of my own experience working with the cities, that cities necessarily don't say no to a lot of things, but they're also hesitant in saying yeses because sometimes they don't know the hows of it, or necessarily not the rationale for the best why. Like, why do I want to do this? And also the procedural barriers or systemic lethargy that you talked about. How do we get over it? I think you have given some really good global examples, and how those could be integrated into our local context is something that we need to think about. But one underpinning that I keep hearing from each of you, from Shruti to Girija to you, I think one thing that I'm hearing, and I think I would like to investigate after Anshul has spoken, is the behavior part of it. How do we get the cultural and the behavioral aspect of it tuned to bring these changes systematically in the system as well as the users? Is something that we could probably sort of take up. But without taking too much time, Anshul, I know you have been waiting. Thank you for your patience. Anshul, the question that I have for you is that your work specifically involves around pushing for gender parity using existing infrastructures, right? So if you could share some good examples or examples, good or bad, either ways, of innovative digital solutions or initiatives that have successfully addressed gender disparities in urban environment. And also, if you could help us understand how such initiatives could be scaled up or replicated in different contexts in different regions. Anshul, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Utsav. And thank you for having me here. It's absolutely phenomenal to be on this panel with such, amazing speakers. So, I'll not to be a dampener, but I think the reality is that I don't think there is any digital solution that has solved this problem, in any shape or form. So I think giving an example would probably not be the right approach, even though, of course, there are people who have tried. There are, digital applications that exist that sort of make it easier for women to, talk about safety. There are employment sector opportunities that have been made available using digital platforms. There are women-led, women-driven public transportation systems that have been created, and apps that sort of enable, access to that. But I do want to talk about one very big systemic challenge that exists when we talk about digital innovation, specifically in the space of gender, targeting, women, or to make cities safer, more accessible for women. I think the crux of the problem is that the technology that is being developed today, the digital solutions that are being developed today, are not women-led. And the industry that we have, the tech digital industry that we have, also has a massive underrepresentation of women across the board. If we think of where does the resourcing for these digital solutions often comes from, which is often the venture capital world, less than 3% women-led founders, women-led companies are actually being able to successfully raise capital in the market right now. And that's just the reality that we are all sort of, dealing with on a daily basis. So in a case like that, the biggest challenge that we are facing is that how do we make access to digital innovation in itself something that is equal, something that is available to all? Right. And I think for that, we need to look at tech, we need to look at digital solutioning differently. We need to look at not bringing in external experts who may not even represent the constituency that we're creating solutions for, and rather encouraging innovations locally, encouraging innovations from within, the communities that we want to create these solutions for. So I think that's a very important first point that I do want to sort of mention over here. If we do talk about existing technologies, like, for example, if we talk about how, there are apps that have features like SOS alerts, real-time location tracking, connectivity with local law enforcement, that are trying to create a safe environment. If we talk about how such technology needs to be scaled across cities, we need a multifaceted approach. City governments, technology developers, law enforcement agencies need to come together to first create a scenario where there isn't inherent discrimination in the system when a woman is trying to access these services. Like all of my co-panelists have already mentioned, women often talk about how just accessing a police station or accessing a public transportation puts them in harm's way, in many cases. So I think the first thing we need to do is we need to remove that. Secondly, I do want to add over here is that, when like at Youth Ki Awaaz, because we're building a platform for people to talk about issues that they deeply care about, one thing that we have done is we have ensured that a majority of the writer base on the platform is women. So we have 55% women writing. Out of the 20 million people who read Youth Ki Awaaz every single month, almost 10 million to 12 million are women readers. But one thing that we have noticed in the narratives that come on the platform is a reinforcement of this belief itself, that technology, that public spaces, that access to public spaces is often not thought of from the point of view of the challenges that women are facing. So I think the first thing that we need to do to scale any technology that is built is invest more in women entrepreneurs, women-led innovators and innovations. And secondly, create a multifaceted approach where city governments, technology developers, and law enforcement agencies are able to come together and work together. For example, partnerships between technology innovators and local police, as well as women groups who are working on solving those local issues, can facilitate a lot, can facilitate solutions a lot faster. And it can have a more coordinated response to things like, say, for example, emergency alerts that may be coming on applications that serve that purpose. The other thing that I do want to mention over here is that educational and professional institutions in cities can also play a very big role in ensuring that the idea that digital innovation needs to be women-led is percolated across city institutions and city governments, right? And I think there's a very, very big role that these institutions need to play and should play, especially because many of these institutions often cater to women from various socioeconomic backgrounds. And I think that's a very important aspect to consider here as well, because often technology is created for somebody who already has access and not necessarily for somebody who is yet to achieve that access and will invariably reach that point. Or often affordability of technology is not kept in mind when the technology or when a digital solution is created. So I think there are these extremely essential aspects that we need to keep in mind. Now, coming down, I do want to sort of, even though I did start with a bit of a dampener that there is no one solution, I do want to mention that there are a couple of opportunities that do exist right in front of us. First, I already mentioned about supporting and encouraging and investing, putting money in women entrepreneurs and women-led innovations. Second, I do want to mention that one area that is heavily lacking, investment and discussion, and that's something that we see a lot when young women are writing on Youth Ki Awaaz, is access to healthcare services for women. And I think that's a huge potential, opportunity area where using telemedicine, and not just telemedicine. Yesterday I was having a fantastic discussion with a young entrepreneur who's using emerging technology like virtual reality devices to make sure that midwives, who are often at the forefront of maternal health and maternal care, are when they are trained, are actually able to understand all possible simulations that may exist when a delivery is happening to prevent maternal mortality and child mortality. So there are innovations available and there are innovations possible. What we need is to focus in a bigger way on access to healthcare services, especially at a local level. Thirdly, I think we need to go beyond basic financial literacy, and we need to now start talking about institutional knowledge building and capacity building for women when it comes to financial literacy programs in the country. Fourth, that I do want to mention is that I think we can absolutely use digital technology to further the idea of online skill development and training, and of course create more remote working opportunities for women across various cities. And I feel at the crux of all of this is definitely economic empowerment that technology needs to provide to a lot of women, who are not being able to access that. So basis like the kind of work that we've done, the kind of surveys that we've done, the kind of stories that we've accessed, it becomes very clear that digital innovation, technology in itself needs to have parity in terms of access and innovation before we even talk about how it's going to actually solve a lot of the problems that we're currently facing in these cities.
Thank you, Anshul. That was wonderful. I think the one thing that really I found something that we could probably deliberate more on are the inherent discriminations, Anshul. I think with technology, it's quite easy because someone is building a piece of technology or a platform, and they generally see it from their own problem statement perspective, and it ends up being something that resolves their problem. So how do you build in those is maybe a critical question to ask, and how do you bring that design thinking process into the mainstream is something worth considering. But as I said before, I think a question that I have for everyone, and everyone can take turns in maybe addressing it, is at the end of the day, we are all talking about underrepresentation. We are talking about some systemic issues that are built in, and we have to always fight against it, or the system is trying to always overcome it. I think most of that also roots to individuals and their perception of what equity or equal might mean from a gender perspective. So my question to each of you, Shruti from the point of view of climate finance, Anshul from the point of technology and digital solutions, Mitali from the point of view of mobility, and Girija from water sanitation perspective, what kind of behavioral nudges do we intend to bring or are necessary at the moment to sort of get this quantum leap in thinking in more equitable and inclusive terms? Because if the default is to be more equitable, if the default is to be more inclusive, then the outcomes by virtue of how we design it will end up being inclusive. But that's where the problem is. So the default, because something that Mitali spoke earlier, is that the low-hanging fruits or the path of least resistance is often the one that leads to the easiest outcome. Just making things affordable doesn't necessarily mean it's equal. So again, the questions to each of you is, from your own sectoral perspective, where do you think these opportunities lie in terms of bringing behavior change, and how can we make them more systemic in nature? So maybe we could go back full circle and start with Shruti.
So I mean, to me, this is not rocket science, right? Like, I just feel like it's very simple, right? We just need to start from bringing women on the table and ensuring that they are participating in discussions and are a part of, decisions that are made. So discussions and decisions, right? You can't make a decision without involving them in the discussion. And there's no point in involving them in a discussion and not including the decision that, ensures that they're included. So it has to be this sort of, an approach where they're looked at in a very integral part of the whole equation. And the second is that the change has to be systemic, right? You cannot just create like one part of something saying that, okay, we will include women, or for example, we'll increase street vendors, women, we'll give them benefits to be on the street. But do they have access to I mean, for example, when we talk about electrification, I know or trucks, we were looking at that. Why are there not enough women truck drivers? It's because they don't have infrastructure along the highway that will make them feel safe and secure. They don't have toilets. They don't have, areas where they can rest. They don't have spaces where they would like, Mitali was highlighting that, people will gawk at. I mean, so we have to change. See, the more women come out, and it is happening. I mean, I think we also have to be optimistic and really applaud ourselves that these dialogues, and thank you, for organizing this. I mean, I think, sorry, I'm just kind of going to digress a little bit and say that, C40 is the permanent convener of U20, as you know, right? So we have created this platform along with UCLG, and we do it every cycle. But I must say that this cycle, thanks to NIUA taking on the technical secretariat, has been very, very expansive, has really looked at bringing many, many stakeholders and doing dialogues like this. And these kind of dialogues are the dialogues that bring about change, right? Because so it's important to really ensure that the change is systemic when you're talking about a transition, more participation from women. And I don't think so. And I just want to say on the finance follows projects. Projects have to follow or be equitable and just. Finance will do that, right? There are already many bonds that look at just women-focused projects. So there's already a lot of push from the financial institutions' perspective that helps gender-led projects. I mean, I used to work at IFC, Mitali is with World Bank, and she would know that getting finance for these projects is not an issue. It's ensuring that they're actually truly implemented on the ground and structured in a way that they're equitable to women, and it will happen. So I think we need to start by ensuring the mainstreaming and institutionalization of actions and projects that include women, and that starts from participation, discussions, and then the on-ground implementation, including them in a very systemic way.
Thank you, Shruti. Girija, what are your thoughts on how do we bring this kind of a transition? Shruti talked about just transitions, and that probably is the key operative word here. Like, what are the opportunities that you see under WASH and water specifically?
Right. I think I'm going to pick on the very crucial aspect that you mentioned about the behavioral change. I think a lot depends on that, the value systems. And I think if we really want the gender equality, then we need to question patriarchy. There's no doubt about that. So gender sensitization is one way I see some hope, like organizing really meaningful initiatives, not just like for the sake of it kind of initiatives. And it's wonderful to see organizations like Youth Ki Awaaz, who work towards gender equality. In Maharashtra, we have groups like Purushuvaj, which means Men Speak, or Men Against Violence and Abuse, MAVA. And I think we need to engage with men more and more, because if we really want to change the mindsets, I think we need to involve them. Because just otherwise doing many such programs for women, for gender, without kind of helping men to kind of change their mindset, it's not going to work. So I think gender sensitization will be very important. So perhaps in the technical sector, in water, also involving more and more women in the technical part of it, giving them more leadership roles. I think all that will definitely change this scenario. I'm not so pessimistic. As Shruti said, there is definitely change happening. We just need to give a lot of push to that. So yeah, I think gender sensitization for me will be a crucial aspect of this. Thank you.
I think it all boils down to the cultural knowledge that we need to sort of integrate into the system, and it's more than just putting all the onus on women. It's we live in a society which is run by both genders, so there is an equal sort of roles and responsibilities that men also need to ensure to bring safety to the table, right? It's about having a mutual dialogue that brings parity to the conversation.
Yeah. Yes. And can I just add that
sure,
men often don't realize that how much they also suffer because of patriarchy.
Absolutely.
And yeah, so I think that's also they need to realize. And yeah.
Yeah, I think that's an observer's bias that we live with. We don't necessarily see the issues facing inward, but it's easy to see the issues facing outward. Thank you, Girija. Mitali, over to you. What are your thoughts on how do you bring these behavioral nudges or behavioral changes in the mobility ecosystem, specifically when it comes to policy making? Because if we are talking about representation, first of all, we are not just talking about women on the table, but women having a viewpoint which is then accounted for while these policies are being drafted, while these practices are being rolled out. What are your thoughts on how do we sort of break this quagmire that we currently have with gender issues on the mobility front?
I think, Utsav, I'll again give an example which is very relatable to all of us. Currently when we use the metro in Delhi, we have to buy the ticket, right? Or you can buy a pass, or you can have something. But that pass or ticket or whatever it is, it doesn't necessarily work with your bus transport. It doesn't work with a cab. Let's say I want to take Uber from my house to go to a station, and then I have to again purchase a ticket, then I get off, and then I have to again purchase another ticket for a bus or whatever, right? This interchange, it is paid for differently. And I'm just coming back from London today. So I'm very, into the whole like contactless and oyster kind of system. And I think all of us who probably experience this in other cities around the world are just like, why can't we figure this out? Why can't we have a single, we have the world's best digital UPI payment system. We have Beam, we have Google Pay, we have, Amazon Pay on UPI. It's like just scan a QR code and pay, right? And that can just be like an integrated kind of payment gateway for all, have a digital wallet, which is just your transport wallet. I think some states are now picking that up. Maharashtra here is picking that up. I haven't looked into it yet. But when this policy is being made, let's say, and women are not in the room, right? Nobody will speak up and say, but it's less likely that a woman will have a smartphone. So let's have a card as well, or let's have some sort of physical, ticket as well, which is working across modes. Or let's have a SMS-based system, any alternative, but somebody has to say it, when these meetings are happening. It doesn't strike people. I've seen it. I've been in those meetings where there are only men, I'm the only woman. They are all discussing, right? And they'll be saying, yeah, that's fine. There are enough women with smartphones. Then I will come with the GSMA report data And I'll be like, the current smartphone ownership gap is about 33%. Hello. So, when you're sitting in these rooms and when you are the only woman in these rooms, that's when you actually bring out this data statistics to point out these gaps. That's when you're able to convince the decision makers, right? And I think that's the reason why we need more women in the room. But in terms of behavioral nudges, I think those are two different things, right? You need policies which then encourage certain behaviors in your commuters when we're talking from a mobility perspective. So from a mobility perspective, you will be able to first bring and then retain more and more commuters onto public transport only when it is convenient for them. Otherwise, there will always be a floating population who will try to move on to private transport the minute they can afford it. Right now, when we do surveys on public transport in India, affordability is the only reason why people are using public transport, not because of time savings or convenience. So what we need to do is create policies like, for example, a simple payment mechanism, or for example, easier interchange, or for example, a convenient traveling experience that, okay, you are going to get AC transport, which you may not be able to get on a two-wheeler, which is your alternative to public transport. If you take the metro, and you will be able to take it for a long journey, and you will also be able to do a fast journey on, say, a regional rail system like, say, Delhi Gurgaon is building. And we need more. So
sorry to interrupt you. Just a few more minutes. I think we also have Anshul.
Yeah, I'm just wrapping up. So essentially, in terms of the behavioral nudges, you create policies to induce the behavior to use and continue using public transport only by making it safer and more inclusive.
Thank you, Mitali. Anshul, over to you. I think on the aspect of digital innovations, you talked about funding and the need for money to flow in, and how affordability is key, and also literacy is quintessential to bring about change. What do you think are the necessary behavioral nudges, or at least systemic nudges, that are required to induce more gendered perspective into digital innovations and solutions?
Thank you. Firstly, I'll go out on a limb and I will just say that if any of the panelists, and everybody's doing such phenomenal work, if any of the panelists would like to access our 20 million readers that come to the website every single month to talk about these issues, we'd love to offer that. And build a public narrative and dialogue around around issues like having a single mechanism of accessing public transport, and so on and so forth. Specifically on the question that you asked, Utsav, I think everybody's already said it. I don't necessarily need to add anything new, but I will just reiterate it from a different lens, which is that the same thing that everybody has said, which is that if you talk about digital technologies, if you talk about access to digital innovation, we need to have more women in the room. Men need to step away and create more space to be able to have platforms where women who are actually dealing with these issues are able to talk about what that innovation needs to look like, instead of me or somebody else, or some big technologist sitting somewhere deciding what that needs to look like, right? I think digital media has given young people across the country, and not just young people, like various constituencies across the country, the ability to highlight intersectional challenges like we've never been able to do before. We've seen it on Youth Ki Awaaz. We see it on the internet in general. Citizen groups are utilizing these platforms to successfully talk to governments directly in many cases, ask for solutions directly. And the impact of these conversations is manifold. And I think the power really here is in narratives. When narratives from diverse groups are shared using digital platforms, or using any platform for that matter, it not only raises awareness, but it also influences public opinion, and it subsequently influences public policy. So I think we need a lot more of narratives from the ground by women, led by women, who are facing a lot of these challenges that we talked about. And we need them flowing across the digital innovation spaces that we're trying to create. So I think that's the only thing that I would add.
Wonderful, thank you. So I think we have spilled over our time. So without taking too much, first of all, big round of applause to all of our speakers. I think you guys have brought a lot of perspective onto the conversation that we wanted to have. Shruti, Mitali, Anshul, Girija, all of you have sort of brought your specific sectoral insights to the table. I think as much I have enjoyed listening to all of you, I hope all of those who have tuned in also found it interesting and also something to take away. I'll take a few seconds to quickly summarize what we have learned and something to take away for our actions moving forward. I think participation and representation of women is something that everyone has sort of emphasized upon. A whole of system approach is absolutely necessary to ensure that we are not looking at incentives boiled down to just one aspect of the value chain, but the entire value chain at large is addressing to the needs of women. We're also talking about gender sensitization. Girija rightly sort of pointed out that we are talking about bringing both parties to the table so that they can have an equitable discussion, but it is also important to understand the woman's perspective from a man's lens, and both men and women have to come down to certain priorities in a certain way. We're also talking about moving away from a tokenistic approach. So it's not just about getting a training done, but it is about inducing behavior change for sustained sort of benefits in the long term. I think Anshul talked about the importance of data and the investments and how that has to be brought to the forefront, and also having an open platform where the power dynamics can also be balanced. I mean, once you have everyone's opinion on the table, it is important to know what people are feeling and what people are asking for. Mitali, you rightly sort of talked about how behavior change has to be driven by facts and figures. Unfortunately, we are talking about heuristics where men on the table, men in the room are coming to conclusions that are convenient for them, and not necessarily looking at the larger picture of women not being rightly represented into the equation. And that driving policy change is probably something that we are aiming to do. I think one last point that I would say that each of you indirectly have talked about is having an open forum or having a platform where these ideas could constantly be exchanged. And again, I think this is a question to take away and a question to think about, and maybe something that we would love to do is to maybe do this more often. Maybe this is required more. Maybe the Shrutis and Mitalis and the Girijas and Anshuls of the world have to get together more often to sort of shake the carpet and get the conversation going in some direction. We need to have more policy makers, more decision makers on the table. Maybe people who represent our governance system also need to be here to understand where exactly the opportunities are. We have all the tools and all the necessary examples in place. It just has to be accepted, and it just has to make sense to all of us. So without further ado, thank you once again to each of you for your time and for for being here, for helping us sort of understand and unfold and sort of unbundle these questions. We look forward to having more of you in the future. And to all those who have joined in, thanks again. I hope it was interesting for all of you. And until next time, have a good one and take care.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much.
Thank you so much.
Bye.